When I was 12, my older brother Noah told my parents I had broken into Dad's home office and snooped through his filing cabinet. Within minutes, I was locked out of my own house, barefoot, in pajamas, with nothing but the night air and the flickering porch light for company. No one asked me what happened. No one even looked at me. Mom told me to think about what I'd done. Dad didn't say a word. And Noah? He stood by the front window, watching with his arms crossed and this smug, satisfied look on his face. I ended up knocking on our neighbor's door at nearly 10 p.m., my cheeks hot from crying and my voice shaking as I asked if I could stay the night. I remember the way Mrs. Rosen, this sweet woman who smelled like vanilla and always wore oversized cardigans, put her arm around me and muttered something about my parents losing their minds. I was too numb to respond. But before I get ahead of myself, let me rewind a bit. My name's Elijah. I'm 17 now, but this all started 5 years ago, back when I still thought families were supposed to protect each other. Back when I still believed that fairness was something you could expect from the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. At that point in my life, I was already used to feeling like the background character in my own family. Noah, who was 15 then, had always been the golden boy. Charming, athletic, quick with a joke around adults. If he got a B, it was celebrated as progress. If I got an A, it was barely mentioned. If he forgot to do chores, it was because he had so much on his plate. If I forgot, it meant I was disrespectful and irresponsible. It wasn't always like that. Or maybe it was, and I just hadn't noticed. But somewhere between Noah winning his first middle school track meet and me accidentally spilling juice on Dad's work papers, our roles got cemented. He was the achiever, the one with potential. I was extra, necessary only in the way background furniture is necessary. Present, but not really considered. And the weird thing was, I didn't even dislike Noah. I actually looked up to him for a long time. I used to trail behind him in the backyard, trying to copy how he kicked the soccer ball or how he skipped rocks across the lake behind our house. He never really encouraged it, but he didn't shove me away either, at least not at first. The shift started slow. At school, when teachers asked about our family, people always knew him. "You're Noah's little brother?" They'd say with a smile, like that alone should be enough to validate my existence. At home, he started correcting me in front of our parents. Little things at first, telling them I hadn't finished my math homework when I said I had, or reminding them that I forgot to take out the trash even though it wasn't my turn. I'd defend myself, but by then I was already tagged as the forgetful one, the undependable one. Dad would sigh and shake his head. Mom would frown at me like I'd disappointed her again. And Noah? He'd just shrug and walk away, the corners of his mouth twitching like he was fighting a smile. My parents weren't bad people, not in the obvious way. They never hit me or yelled much. They just didn't see me. Or maybe they chose not to. They were both lawyers, the kind of people who carried their stress home in briefcases and never quite stepped out of courtroom mode. Conversations at dinner felt like depositions. Questions were loaded. Answers had to be exact. There was no room for "I don't know" or "I forgot." And no one knew how to play that game. I didn't. I wore my feelings too openly, got flustered when I was interrupted, and froze when someone asked me a question in that sharp, clipped tone Dad used when he was already halfway angry. That particular week had started off weird. Dad was unusually tense, even more than usual. He'd been pacing his office every night after dinner, making phone calls and locking the door behind him. The glass panels on the door meant I could still see him inside, but the sound was muffled. I caught a few words: audit, discrepancy, confidential. I didn't think much of it. I figured it was work stuff, grown-up problems that had nothing to do with me. Until Friday night, when the entire house seemed to freeze. We had just finished dinner, lasagna and salad, and Mom was washing dishes while Noah and I sat at the kitchen table. He was on his phone, pretending not to notice me. I was doodling in the corner of my notebook, not really drawing anything in particular, just squiggles and shapes. That's when Dad came storming in from his office, his face pale and tight with anger. He held a yellow folder in one hand and pointed at me with the other. "Elijah," he said, his voice low and cold. "What were you doing in my office today?" I looked up, completely confused. "What? Don't lie to me." The drawer was left open. My files were moved. I didn't go in your office." He glanced at Noah, who hadn't even looked up from his phone. "Noah says he saw you go in." And just like that, the air in the room changed. Like some invisible switch had flipped. I turned to Noah, who slowly raised his eyes and shrugged. "I saw him near the door," he said casually. "Thought he was just looking for something." My heart dropped. "That's not true. I didn't." But Dad wasn't listening. "You don't go into private spaces without permission. You especially don't go through confidential work files." "I didn't." My voice cracked. I looked to Mom, who had stopped drying a plate and was now staring at me like I'd just confessed to robbing a bank. "I swear, I didn't even touch the door." "Then how was the drawer open?" Dad snapped. "I don't know. Maybe you left it open." That was the wrong thing to say. His eyes narrowed. "Do not talk back to me." "I'm not. Why would I even go in there?" "I didn't." "Elijah," Mom said sharply, stepping in. "Enough. You're making it worse." I could feel it unraveling. My voice felt too small, my body too frozen. My words weren't working. It didn't matter what I said. They had already decided I was guilty. Within minutes, the argument turned into a verdict. Dad pointed to the front door and told me to go outside until I was ready to be honest. I thought he was joking at first. When he opened the door and stood there waiting, I realized he wasn't. "No shoes," I whispered, glancing down at my sock-covered feet. "Should have thought about that before you started lying," he said. Noah didn't say anything, just leaned back in his chair, arms folded, expression unreadable. So I stepped outside. The air was cold, biting at my skin through the thin fabric of my pajamas. I didn't know what to do. I sat on the porch swing for a while, hoping someone would come get me, that they'd realize they'd made a mistake, that maybe Noah would admit the truth. But nothing happened. After half an hour, I stood up, walked down the street, and knocked on Mrs. Rosen's door. She let me in without hesitation. "I figured something like this would happen eventually," she muttered, handing me a blanket and setting me up on her couch. "Your parents, they've always treated that other boy like he walks on water." I didn't say anything. I just curled up, staring at the flickering television, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to figure out why Noah would lie, why my parents believed him so easily, and more than anything, why it hurt so much more than I thought it would. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that everything was about to change. Because the next morning, my Aunt Clara came over. And unlike the rest of my family, Clara didn't take things at face value. She asked questions. She checked facts. And when she logged into the security system Dad installed the previous summer, something even he seemed to forget existed. What she found shook the entire family to its core. The morning after that night on Mrs. Rosen's couch, I woke up to the soft clink of a teacup being set beside me and the smell of scrambled eggs wafting from her kitchen. She gave me a small smile and said, "You can stay as long as you need, honey." I barely managed to thank you before my stomach turned from the nerves. I kept thinking about going home, but not because I wanted to, because I didn't know what would happen if I didn't. Around 9 a.m., there was a knock on the door. I tensed, thinking it might be my dad or Mom, finally coming to drag me back with more lectures about boundaries and disappointment. But it wasn't. It was Aunt Clara. Now, Clara wasn't the kind of aunt who showed up with cookies and coloring books. She was Dad's younger sister, in her early 40s, with a no-nonsense attitude and a razor-sharp intuition. She lived a few blocks away and didn't visit often, mostly because, as she once put it, "Your parents like to control the narrative, and I don't do theater." But she'd always been kind to me in her own way. She remembered my birthday every year without fail, and once slipped me a 20 at Thanksgiving after Dad scolded me in front of the whole table for talking back. I wasn't even talking. I was correcting him about a math fact. "Elijah," she said when I opened the door. "You okay?" I nodded, though my voice caught in my throat when I tried to speak. Mrs. Rosen ushered her in. Clearly relieved someone from my family who wasn't insane had shown up. Clara sat me down, asked what happened. I told her everything. Dad's accusation, Noah's lie, being thrown out, and how no one gave me a chance to explain. Clara didn't react dramatically. She just took a breath, pursed her lips, and muttered, "Typical." Then she asked a question I hadn't even thought of. "Did they check the camera logs?" I blinked. "What? Your dad's office has a security cam installed. He set it up last year after that break-and scare down the block. Little black thing in the top corner of the room." My heart thudded. No one mentioned it. Clara's jaw tightened. "Of course not." She stood up, already pulling out her phone. "Let's go." I hesitated. "Are we going home?" "Just for a bit," she said. "You're not going back in alone." We walked down the street, my nerves jangling with every step. Clara didn't speak much, just kept tapping at her phone with growing irritation. When we got to the house, she rang the doorbell and stepped back like it was enemy territory. Dad answered the door, looking surprised, then annoyed when he saw me behind her. "Elijah," he said stiffly. "We were going to come get you." "Uh-huh," Clara replied before I could say anything. "You do remember you installed a camera in your office, right?" Dad blinked. "Yes, why? Let's have a look at the footage, shall we?" Dad hesitated, just a flicker, but it was enough to confirm what Clara already suspected. "It's not necessary," he said. "Noah already told us what happened." "Noah lied," she said flatly. "And if you won't prove otherwise, then I'm going to assume you know that too." Mom showed up behind him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Clara, we don't need your interference." Clara's voice turned cold. "You have a 12-year-old kid sleeping on a neighbor's couch because you couldn't be bothered to ask questions. You're lucky all I'm doing is interfering." I wanted to crawl into the ground. The hallway felt like it was closing in on me. But then, for the first time since the whole thing started, I saw it. Uncertainty in Dad's eyes. Doubt. He stepped back. "Fine." We followed him inside, straight to the office. He unlocked the computer, typed in a password, and pulled up the security footage. The timestamp was easy to find. It showed exactly what Clara expected. Noah, slipping into the office after school, glancing around, opening the drawer, flipping through a few folders, and pocketing something before walking out. My stomach twisted. There it was. Clear as day. Dad leaned back, silent. Clara crossed her arms. "Want to explain why your golden boy lied and you punished the wrong kid?" Mom looked at the screen like it was a glitch. There must be some mistake." "Yeah," Clara said sharply. "The mistake was trusting him without proof. I thought that would be it, that they'd finally see the truth and everything would go back to normal. But that's not how it worked. Because instead of apologizing, my dad turned to me and said, 'Why didn't you just say it was Noah?' I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't even go near your office." He looked at me like that wasn't good enough. Like somehow, I'd failed again by not accusing my brother. Noah was called in next. He came downstairs all sleepy-eyed and smug, until he saw the footage. That wiped the smirk right off his face. "Explain," Dad barked. Noah's eyes darted around. "I was just looking for something. I didn't take anything." "You lied," Clara said, stepping forward. "You blamed Elijah. You watched him get thrown out of the house and didn't say a word." I didn't think it'd go that far." "You knew exactly what you were doing," she snapped. Dad looked furious, but not for the reasons I expected. "What did you take?" "Nothing. I was just curious." "What did you take, Noah?" That was when Mom stepped in, placing a hand on Dad's arm. "Let's just calm down." "No," Dad barked. "This is serious. That folder had." He stopped, but I noticed the flicker in Clara's expression. She knew. Whatever was in that folder wasn't just boring legal stuff. She looked at Dad sharply. "What was in it?" Dad didn't answer. Noah backed away slowly, muttering. "I didn't know it was that important." Clara stared between them. "Oh my God," she said slowly. "This isn't just about Elijah, is it? What did Noah find?" "I didn't read it," Noah said quickly. "I swear. I just saw the logo. Something about taxes, or..." Dad's voice boomed. "Go to your room." And Noah, for once in his life, obeyed without a word. I expected my parents to apologize then, to turn to me and finally say, "We were wrong." But instead, Mom looked at me and said, "We just need some time to sort this out." "Sort what out?" "You accused me of breaking in, lied to my face, and threw me out into the cold with no shoes. And now I was being told to be patient?" I didn't say anything. I just left. Clara followed me out, furious. "You're not staying here," she said. "Not while they're still covering for him." I ended up at her house, which smelled like lemon soap and had dusty books on every shelf. She made me tea, sat me down, and told me, "This isn't over. Not even close." In the days that followed, things didn't get better, they got worse. Noah doubled down on playing the victim, claimed he was being unfairly punished and that I was trying to turn the family against him. He even cried at dinner one night, saying I'd always been jealous of him. And they believed him. Or they pretended to. Clara started showing up more, started asking more questions, digging deeper. And that's when she found the second camera, one Dad didn't remember installing. After the second camera footage surfaced, everything inside me wanted to believe that justice was finally coming. That maybe, just maybe, The truth would speak loud enough to drown out the years of being ignored, blamed, and belittled. But the thing no one tells you about finally being right, about finally being proven right, is that sometimes it doesn't fix anything. Not right away. The second camera had been installed in the hallway outside the office, tucked above a decorative shelf where no one thought to look. Dad put it there when the alarm company offered it as a bundle upgrade, then promptly forgot about it. Clara remembered because she'd been the one who helped install the app on his phone last summer. That camera, bless its little digital heart, showed Noah sneaking out of the office and slipping something into his backpack. It also showed him stopping outside the front door a few minutes later, pulling out his phone, and taking a picture of whatever document he'd stolen. When Clara confronted Dad about it, he looked like someone had yanked the floor out from under him. He muttered something about needing time to process and walked out of the room. Mom tried to smooth things over by insisting there had to be an explanation, that maybe Noah didn't understand what he was doing, that he was just a kid. But I was a kid too, wasn't I? A younger one. And that hadn't stopped them from shoving me out into the cold like I was a criminal. Still, no apologies came. No one pulled me aside and said they were sorry for believing a lie. No one sat me down to ask how I was feeling or what it had been like, sleeping on a stranger's couch and watching my brother tear me down from behind a wall of charm. Noah got grounded for 2 weeks. No phone, no video games, and no going out. That was it. I thought that was my lowest point. But it wasn't. Because even though the truth was out, the atmosphere at home changed in a way I couldn't explain. It was like I had been upgraded from invisible to inconvenient. A reminder of something they didn't want to face. They didn't punish me anymore, but they didn't talk to me either. Conversations at dinner would float around me like I wasn't there. If I answered a question, it was met with silence or a quick change of topic. And Noah? He walked around like he was the victim. He'd sigh dramatically when I walked into the room, or mutter under his breath about spies and traitors. Sometimes he'd look right at me and say things like, "Hope you're happy," with that same fake wounded expression he'd perfected years ago. Clara kept inviting me over, sometimes for the weekend, sometimes for longer. I started keeping a duffel bag packed in my closet just in case. At her place, things were different. Quiet. Safe. She worked from home most days, doing graphic design, and her little house was filled with color and books and art supplies. She let me be angry without trying to fix it. She let me be quiet without demanding to know what was wrong. And slowly, I started to rebuild. I didn't know I was rebuilding at first. I thought I was just surviving. But something inside me shifted. I started going to the library after school, not just to avoid going home, but because it was one of the few places where I felt like I mattered. I'd sit in the back corner, headphones in, doing homework or watching videos about things that had nothing to do with my life. Space documentaries, chess tutorials, coding lessons. I started teaching myself how to program using free online courses. I didn't tell anyone. It was mine. Something no one could take credit for or ruin. One of the librarians, Mr. Henry, noticed me coming in every day and started chatting with me. He was in his 60s, soft-spoken, and had this way of making you feel like the smartest person in the room without saying much. He asked what I was working on, and when I told him about the coding, his face lit up. "You know," he said one day, "there's a tech club starting next month. They meet on Wednesdays. Bunch of kids teaching each other stuff. You should come." I almost said no. I almost let the fear win. But something in me, a quiet, stubborn ember, said yes. The first meeting was awkward. A bunch of kids huddled around laptops, tossing jargon like candy. But by the second week, I was hooked. I built my first mini-game. A stupid little thing where a cat chased a laser pointer. But I made it. And when I showed it to the others, they clapped. Clapped. No sarcasm. No backhanded praise. Just support. That was the first time in a long time I felt proud of something. Meanwhile, back at home, Noah was spiraling. Quietly, but noticeably. His grades slipped. He got benched from the soccer team for missing practices. I overheard my parents whispering one night, arguing about whether he needed a tutor, whether the stress was affecting him, whether I had done something to upset him. I couldn't believe it. Even in his unraveling, they found a way to center him, to protect his image. But I didn't care anymore. Not like I used to. Clara kept fanning that little ember in me, encouraging every tiny victory. She helped me apply for a summer coding camp that only took 20 kids from the whole county. I got in. When the acceptance letter arrived, I sat in her kitchen, stunned. rereading the email 5 times before it sank in. "You did that," she said, smiling. "Not in spite of everything. Because of everything." I nodded, but I didn't cry. I didn't know how to anymore. Not really. The camp changed me. It was intense, sure, but I was surrounded by kids who got it, who were curious and weird and obsessed with building things. I made friends. Real ones. The kind who didn't care that I was the other kid back home. We stayed up late debugging projects and eating instant noodles and talking about the future like it was something we could actually shape. When I came back that fall, I felt different. Not tougher, just clearer. I knew who I was. But the tension at home hadn't gone away. If anything, it had deepened. My parents still refused to talk about what had happened. Noah pretended it never did. But I didn't need them to validate me anymore. I started spending more time at Clara's, volunteering at the library, and even mentoring a younger kid at the tech club. His name was Micah, and he reminded me of myself, quiet, wide-eyed, always second-guessing himself. I helped him build his first website. He cried when it worked. I didn't tell anyone at home. They didn't ask. One evening, months after the incident, I overheard Noah on the phone in the hallway. He was whispering, pacing. "No, I didn't tell them. No, they don't know I still have it. Look, just wait. I'm trying to figure out how to use it." That word again. It. That's when it clicked. Whatever he took from Dad's office, he still had it. And he was planning something. My curiosity burned, but I stayed quiet. I had learned that part of the game. Bide your time. Watch. Wait. Let them show you who they are. That night, I asked Clara about it. About the document. She sighed. "I wasn't going to tell you yet. But you deserve to know." It turned out the folder Noah stole wasn't just a bunch of tax papers. It was related to an old legal dispute. One that could have ruined Dad's career if it resurfaced. Nothing criminal, but shady enough to blow things up. Noah had found out and taken a photo of it. And now, he was using it. Maybe not yet. Maybe he didn't even know how to. But the leverage was there. Clara looked at me, dead serious. "He's playing with fire. And your parents are too blind to see it." I stared at the floor. "Why didn't you tell them?" "Because they'd protect him. Again. Or worse, they'd accuse you of lying. Again." I didn't respond. But something inside me hardened. Noah had always been ahead of me. In charm. In favoritism. In playing the system. But not anymore. Because now, I had something he didn't. I had truth. I had patience. And I had nothing to lose. So I waited. And the fall came faster than anyone expected. But not for me. For him. I didn't have to wait long before Noah gave me the perfect opening. It started small, like everything with him always did. A careless comment. A late-night phone call overheard through the thin walls at Clara's house. Because by then, I was splitting my weeks between her place and home, depending on the mood in the air. I never moved out entirely, mostly because I didn't want to give up my bedroom, but also because I knew I needed to stay close. I needed to watch. Noah had always been reckless, but this time, it was different. His grades were still tanking, but now he didn't care. He'd given up pretending. He stopped trying to impress Mom and Dad, and he started skipping school more often. When they confronted him, he just rolled his eyes and mumbled something about being under pressure. And as usual, they tried to fix it by throwing money at the problem. Tutors, therapy, new clothes, a new phone. But behind the scenes, Noah was unraveling. And in his unraveling, he got sloppy. One night I was home, lying in bed with my headphones on, but no music playing, when I heard him on a call again. He was pacing outside my room, and his voice was tight with frustration. "They're acting like I'm the problem," he whispered harshly. "Like I'm some disappointment now. It's pathetic. You should have seen my dad. He almost cried when he found out what was in that folder. And yeah, I still have the pic. Don't worry. I've got it saved in multiple places." Pause. "No, I'm not going to send it unless I have to. But if they try to cut me off or act like I don't have options, they'll see. That file would destroy him." Another pause. "No, they'd never believe Elijah. That kid still worships them even after everything. He's just quiet now. It's weird." I clenched my fists under the blanket, my heart racing. I didn't worship them. Not anymore. But I was quiet, and he had no idea how dangerous that had made me. I knew I couldn't go to my parents. Clara was right. They'd bury it, again. They'd twist it into something convenient. And besides, I didn't just want to expose Noah. I wanted to break the golden child illusion for good. So I started planning. I had a few things working in my favor. First, Noah thought I was harmless. He assumed I was still the same shy, younger brother who cried on Mrs. Rosen's porch. He had no idea I'd changed, grown sharper, more calculating. Second, I had Clara, who was more than willing to help once I told her what I overheard. And third, I had something more valuable than proof. I had time. Noah's mistake was thinking he had control just because he had leverage. But leverage without a plan is just a loaded gun with no target. All I had to do was guide him into a corner and let him pull the trigger on himself. So that's exactly what I set out to do. Clara and I spent the next few weeks building what she called insurance. We started by securing every version of the footage we had, from the hallway cam, the office, even the timestamps that showed when Noah accessed the drawer. Clara had a friend in cybersecurity who helped us back it all up, on hard drives, in encrypted cloud folders, and in an email chain scheduled to release if certain conditions weren't met. Then we started gathering Noah's digital footprint. Turns out, he wasn't just reckless, he was dumb. He used the same password for almost everything, and I knew it because I'd seen him type it in before when we used to share a laptop years ago. With Clara's guidance, we accessed his cloud storage and found the picture he took of Dad's confidential folder. It was worse than I imagined. The document detailed a shady financial deal from years ago, before I was even born, where Dad had advised a company during a legal gray area merger. Nothing illegal, but extremely unethical. If made public, it could cost him his law license, especially now that he was a partner at his firm. Noah had no idea how much damage he was holding. But now I did. And I wasn't going to use it against Dad. I was going to use it against Noah. That was the first layer of the setup. The second came in the form of Micah, the younger kid I was mentoring at the tech club. He'd recently won a local programming competition and was being scouted by a summer academy that Clara had helped me get into the year before. We started collaborating more, building a mini-app together. Micah had a knack for digital forensics, and he taught me how to trace file transfers and metadata. I didn't even have to explain what I wanted it for. He just thought it was cool that I was building something stealthy. Clara made sure we stayed on the ethical side. Don't ever become what you're fighting, she warned me, but she didn't stop us. By the end of the month, we had everything we needed. The bait came next. I waited for the perfect moment. A family dinner that Clara insisted we all attend. It was the first time in months that we were all in the same room. Me, Noah, Mom, Dad, and Clara sitting across from each other at a restaurant downtown. The air was awkward, heavy. Noah kept checking his phone. Mom was pretending everything was fine, asking about school like we were some picture-perfect family. That's when I said, carefully, "So, did anyone ever find out what happened to that folder Dad was missing?" The table went still. Dad cleared his throat. It was resolved. Clara raised an eyebrow. Was it? Noah glanced up, tension flickering across his face. I looked directly at him. Because if it was still floating around, someone could use it to hurt the family, right? Noah froze. Just for a second. But it was enough. Dad shot me a look. Elijah, that's not dinner conversation. I shrugged. Just curious. Later that night, Noah cornered me in the hallway at home. His voice was low, panicked. What was that? What was what? I asked innocently. You know what? Don't play dumb. Are you threatening me? I gave him a long look. Are you worried about being threatened? He stared at me like I was speaking a different language. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? That night, he tried to delete the photo. Micah's tracker picked it up instantly. We intercepted the deletion command and restored the backup. Then I sent Noah an anonymous email. Just one line. Nice try. Try again and everyone sees it. The panic set in fast. He started spiraling even more, snapping at everyone, skipping school, flunking his midterms. But still, my parents didn't connect the dots. They thought he was burnout. They blamed social media, peer pressure, even Clara for getting too involved. But never Noah himself. I needed something bigger to wake them up. That's when I started working on the final piece of the puzzle. A presentation. I called it the Golden Child Project. I disguised it as a tech club project, an anonymous digital story told through interactive slides. It detailed a fictional family. A boy named N who stole, lied, manipulated, and blackmailed his own father using sensitive information. A brother named E who was blamed for everything. A family who refused to see the truth. Each slide was timed. Automated. Unstoppable once launched. I scheduled the presentation for the Tech Club's end-of-year showcase. It would be streamed to parents, mentors, and guests, including mine. I gave Clara access to pull the plug at any time if it went too far. But she didn't. She watched it first and said, quietly, "It's brutal, but it's true." On the day of the showcase, I wore my best hoodie, sat at the front of the room, calm as ever. Noah didn't come. Mom and Dad sat in the second row, politely clapping after each presentation. Then mine started. The first few slides seemed generic, just a story about digital footprints and ethics. But then it shifted. Details emerged. A file. A betrayal. A cover-up. A child thrown out without shoes. A camera. I watched my parents' faces change. It was slow. Disbelief. Confusion. Recognition. And then horror. Dad stood up halfway through. "Elijah, turn it off." I didn't. Because it was too late. The truth was already out there. And I wasn't scared anymore. The silence in the auditorium was thick. Not shocked silence. Processing silence. Like everyone was trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. The final slide of the Golden Child project sat on screen like a loaded weapon. Plain white text on black background. Some lies don't just ruin trust. They redefine it. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. The stream cut out automatically, just as planned. I stood slowly, brushing invisible dust off my jeans. The applause came, awkward and uneven. Not because the presentation was bad, because they knew it wasn't just a story. At least half the people in the room recognized the veiled truth behind it. Clara caught my eye from the back row and gave a slow, deliberate nod. She didn't clap. She didn't have to. Mom and Dad didn't stay for the Q&A session. They didn't even look at me as they left. Dad was pale, lips pressed into a tight line. Mom looked dazed, like she'd walked through a dream and couldn't wake up. It was a sharp contrast from the confident, polished couple who normally showed up to school events just long enough to be seen and congratulated. And Noah? He didn't show his face at all. Not that night. Not the next morning. Because he knew. I'd made sure to send him a copy of the presentation before the event, an hour before it went live. No threats. No commentary. Just a subject line. "This is what you've done." If he'd wanted to stop it, he could have tried. But I think he realized, in that moment, that I wasn't bluffing anymore. And I think for the first time in his life, he was afraid of me. The fallout started quietly. At first, no one said anything directly. But whispers followed me everywhere. Teachers who had always called me Noah's little brother stopped doing that. Mr. Henry, the librarian, patted my shoulder and just said, "Good for you." Micah sent me a message later that night that simply read, "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen." But at home, the silence turned suffocating. Mom didn't speak to me for 3 days. Dad locked himself in his office and only came out for work. Noah stayed in his room. Or maybe just snuck out the window and went somewhere else. I didn't care. For once, I didn't need their words or their validation. I had something far more powerful. Control of the narrative. For years, I had been the quiet one. The invisible one. The blamed one. Now, they had to sit in that silence and squirm. And I wasn't interested in rescuing them from it. It took a week before Dad finally confronted me. He came into my room without knocking, typical, and stood by the door like he didn't quite know where to start. "Elijah," he said, voice tight, "you embarrassed this family." I closed my laptop. "No." I exposed it. "You made personal matters public." "No." I repeated slowly. "I told a story. With facts. With timestamps. With proof. Just because you didn't like what people saw doesn't make it untrue." He flinched slightly. "Do you have any idea what you've done to your brother?" That made me laugh. It wasn't loud, or even cruel. It was just honest. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, for the first time in his life, I gave him consequences. "You're welcome." He didn't respond. Just stood there for a second longer, then walked out, slamming the door behind him. That night, I moved out for good. Clara had been offering for months, and I had held off, thinking maybe, just maybe, my parents would come around. That they'd realize what they'd done. That some part of them would be capable of reflection or remorse. But they weren't. And I didn't need to keep waiting for people who couldn't even see me. Clara turned the guest room into my space. We rearranged furniture, painted the walls navy blue, put up shelves for my books and projects. It didn't feel like a backup house anymore. It felt like mine. Like the first place I'd ever been allowed to exist without apologizing for it. And as for Noah, his fall came fast and messy. A few weeks after the presentation, Clara got a phone call from one of her contacts at Dad's firm. It turned out the rumor mill had kicked into overdrive after the showcase. Someone had connected the dots between the fictional story and a real set of events that suspiciously mirrored a scandal buried in Dad's past. That old document, the one Noah stole, was starting to leak in whispers. Quietly. In parts. Clara and I hadn't released it. We hadn't needed to. Noah had. In a last-ditch attempt to retaliate, he'd shared it with someone. Probably a friend. Maybe a wannabe influencer or someone stupid enough to think they could use it to get attention. But Noah hadn't bothered to scrub the metadata from the photo. And guess what that included? Time of capture, phone model, and username tied to the original file upload. The firm investigated internally. It didn't take long to trace it back to Noah's cloud account. Dad was furious. Not at me. At him. There were meetings, phone calls, legal threats. Clara said it was a miracle Dad didn't lose his partnership. The firm made him sign some kind of private settlement agreement, essentially swearing to bury the document for good and take a reduced role in the company for a cooling-off period. His public profile was scrubbed from the firm's website. He kept his job, for now, but his reputation took a hit. And Noah? Well, he was sent to live with a relative out of state. The official story was that he needed a fresh start. But everyone knew. You don't send your favorite son away unless you have no choice. Mom drove him to the airport without saying goodbye to me. I watched from Clara's car, parked across the street. Noah didn't even look back. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I just felt done. That summer, I was accepted into a national youth tech initiative. I got a scholarship. My little cat and laser pointer game had evolved into a coding portfolio strong enough to attract mentorship offers from 3 different universities. Micah and I started a small YouTube channel teaching programming basics. It grew faster than we expected. Clara beamed every time someone asked her if I was her son. And you know what? I let them believe it. Because in every way that mattered, she was my parent. She'd chosen me, fought for me, believed in me. One afternoon, months later, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a photo. Me, age 12, sitting on her porch with red eyes and a blanket wrapped around me. She'd taken it that night, without me knowing. On the back, she'd written, "Rock bottom is the best foundation to rebuild on. Look how high you've climbed." I stared at it for a long time. It didn't make me sad. It made me proud. Because I had been the scapegoat. The forgotten son. The easy target. But now I was something else entirely. I was free. And I never looked back.